For the next item on our agenda, we have a fireside chat in partnership with the Institute of Corporate Directors on the topic of board governance and stewardship in Malaysia's sustainable development transition. Moderating this session, please welcome Jackie Ma, Executive Vice President of the ICDM. Could I also invite the speakers to join us on stage, Datin Sri Sunita Rajakumar, Co-Chair of the Climate Governance Malaysia, and Tony Chin Kok Sang, Advisory Board Member of Kanzun Ventures and the former Chair of Sumitomo Mitsui Bank. Jackie, over to you.
Thank you. I'll just let my panelists settle down and everyone to settle down too after the photo op. Okay, so I'm very honored to have with me two ICDM, actually, fellow members on stage today. The session is actually on board governance. I know you all started with SME and we went into the public sector, and rightly so, we will end with the private sector and look into what the private sector can play. And today we will talk a little bit about how the board can lead this role. I think that's meant to be a Slido for the participants. I promise you this is your last Slido of the day and no debates. So if you could have the code up, and if you could scan and help us. The Slido question is, what are the barriers boards are currently facing in their organization's net zero transition plan? So we would like to hear from you. Please do respond. And panelists, whilst we're waiting for that, I'll introduce our panelists today. On far right, we have Datin Sri Sunita Rajakumar. She's well known for her advocacy in the climate change space. She's chairman of Climate Governance Malaysia, the country chapter of the World Economic Forum's Climate Governance Initiative, second in the world and first in Asia Pacific. Datin is the chairman of Dutch Lady Milk Industries, an independent non-executive director at Petronas Chemicals, HSBC Malaysia, MCIS Insurance and Zurich General Insurance, as well as trustee of 4 charitable foundations. Datin Sunita is also adjunct professor in climate governance and sustainability at UNITA International University, fellow of the ICDM, sits on external advisory committee for Sunway University's Masters in Sustainable Development Management program, and is currently in the workstream lead for government policy for the CEO Action Network, an industry-led sustainability initiative. Welcome, Datin. And let's move on to Tony. Tony is the immediate past chairman of Sumitomo Mitsui Bank Malaysia, and is currently the advisory board member of Kanzun Ventures. He has had many years of experience in the audit, banking, and finance industry across Australia, Singapore, and Malaysia. He's a corporate turnaround specialist and also a professional independent director at both public listed and non-listed companies. Tony graduated from the University of Melbourne and has attended the investment banking residential program at Chicago's Northwestern University. He's a fellow member at Chartered Accountant Australia and New Zealand, as well as ICDM. Thank you. Could we have some responses? I know the timing is a little bit late, but if you could just click on that and what you feel are the barriers that boards are currently facing in their organization. Technical knowledge, clarity, anything in terms of resources. We see some participation. Maybe I can encourage, maybe some coffee would help. Maybe we can start off that in. I mean, whilst we're on this subject, I guess here maybe you would like to share in your experience of work, what do you see are some of the challenges that boards are facing when they're looking at net zero plans?
Thank you so much, Jackie. Thank you to EcoBusiness and ICDM for having us here. So we're seeing this bifurcation between businesses that consider this a reporting and disclosure problem, and very often find the one individual in the organization who's most comfortable with numbers, the CFO, and telling them this is your problem and you need to come up with a really strong integrated report. But on the other end of the spectrum are businesses that really understand the extent of the climate emergency and are looking to embed sustainability into the DNA of the business. And this makes a huge difference because then you see so much more alignment It's not just about emissions, about being nature positive, about shadow pricing, being proactive and advocating with the government so that the government understands what will help businesses do good better. So this is the bifurcation we're seeing, that some businesses are definitely ready and are part of the conversation, are looking forward, are advocating, agitating. And there are many, many businesses that are still saying, is this an expense? Do I need to do this? What does the regulator say?
Thank you. And as the minister, YB minister said that, you can't do anything on a dead planet. So if we look within the Slido responses, we do see technical knowledge and probably cultural change. I presume you mean mindset coming to play. Tony, any views on that?
Yeah, I think the problem comes from the way public listed company board meets, right? As mentioned by Jackie, I've sat on the banking board and also public listed company board. Now, the banks are financial institutions, insurance and banks, insurance companies and banks are governed by Bank Negara. And because they have quite a huge requirement for us to be more compliant and more things that we need to report to Bank Negara, these two insurance companies and banks do meet a lot more often. But in the public listed companies, apart from the big ones, most tend to only meet 4 times a year. And the main thing on the agenda is basically compliance, and that is to approve the quarterly financial statements for release to Bursa Malaysia. So the directors at the banks don't actually meet often enough and long enough. So when they don't meet long enough, they actually are not able to bring more things onto the table. And they also do not really upgrade themselves. So that is why there's a view, common to what the Slido's reports are, that the technical knowledge is lacking amongst a lot of directors in this particular area.
Thank you. Thank you. As I also like to write upon that answer, ICDM organizes the Mandatory Sustainability Program. We have by far trained around about 2,000 directors since last year. We've noticed that the knowledge gap between some directors like Datin, who is very advanced, and there are directors who are coming in at a very basic level. But what the program we have seen happen is that there has been sharing of practices from larger companies who are more advanced with the smaller cap companies. So in a way, it's a positive move, but maybe not much so quick enough. So maybe we move into the panel discussion now. Datin, maybe your views, if you look at the boardroom and management, how can they both work together in addressing and assessing climate risk, especially for companies that are in hard-to-abate sectors? I know this has been a common theme that has come out through the whole forum, or those that are significantly impacted by climate change.
Yeah, thank you, Jackie. So remember, CGM, Climate Governance Malaysia, is 5 years old. And when I was invited to set this up as a country chapter for this World Economic Forum initiative, I really didn't know anything about the climate emergency. And if I can pick this up, everybody in this room can pick this up. And there's so much information available. I think the real challenge is actually critical thinking skills. Because it's such a fast-moving space, there's no silver bullet, there's no real roadmap. You really have to think clearly, is this what we should be doing? And I'll give you some examples. And these are things that in really good boardrooms, we have these tough discussions with management. So I'll give you some examples of what might not seem to work. How many of you understand the concept of net zero, 2050? I think most of you, right? If you're here, chances are you're a convert. You've got pretty basic climate literacy. Net zero by 2050 is supposed to limit warming to 2 degrees by the end of the century, and to keep pathways open to 1.5 degrees of warming. Can you see the problem? That this is limiting warming for 2100, but we're already at 1.5 degrees of warming now. And so this is the IPCC's target. They're working on an overshoot scenario because we haven't taken urgent climate action. So now the extent of reductions needed are going to be significantly more. How many businesses really understand this? And here's another tsunami coming your direction. Sure, if you have a net zero strategy this year, chances are you have credibility. But by next year, if you don't have or you're not evolving a nature positive strategy, you're going to lose credibility very quickly. And the minister didn't allude to this, but in Kelantan, they've just cleared 300 hectares, completely cleared it, so destroyed biodiversity. You have about 1,000 orang asli literally homeless for green energy, large hydro. So can you see this misalignment is going to catch you out if you're really not thinking hard about what it means to be part of the solution instead of perpetuating the problem?
Thank you, Datin. Tony, on Datin's point, doing business the right way, what really does a director need to do? I mean, if you're not already, with the technical knowledge that you've mentioned, you're not at that stage, what do you need to do?
Thanks, Jackie. I think there is too much emphasis on the role of a director. I think there is a bit of a lack of understanding generally about what we do and what our roles and responsibility as directors. Primarily, our role is the role of an oversight. Okay. Now, all the plans, business plans, strategies, tactics, etc., are actually developed by management. And when they put it up to the board, we have a robust discussion as to whether that is the right way to go, and what are the timeline and what's the cost, etc. So in that respect, many of these things that needs to be done in terms of climate change actually needs to be addressed at the C-suite level or one below, right? And the directors come overlay to add additional information or additional views in setting the direction together with management.
Thank you. Datin, any comments? You feel that there's tension from each side? One side is less educated than the other?
Yeah, of course. And the board, yes, definitely there's a very strong oversight role, but the board is ultimately responsible, and there's climate litigation around the world that's evidence of that. But the board needs to balance a very difficult position. It needs to be a partner to the business and a guardian of the business as well. So if there are wrong decisions, if we're not anticipating emerging risks, or what they call double materiality or dynamic materiality, things that don't appear to be material right now, but have the potential to become extremely material very quickly, or double materiality, where it might not even affect your bottom line, but it is going to affect your business. And that's on us. We have to watch out for this.
Correct. And also, just for the room's attention, also, there are increasing climate litigations against companies, against board of directors. I mean, although it has not come to Malaysia, I think it's something that we foresee may come at some point. Any views from both of you on that?
Yeah, so we're featuring Client Earth, right, in September during the National Summit. We've got 3 speakers down, and we're inviting the AG's Chambers, which is really in-house legal counsel for the government, and we're inviting the Bar Council as well, because obviously they need to be far more vocal about this than they are. And they're going to run through with a focus on greenwashing and also rights of marginalized communities. So I'm really looking forward to that session in September.
Tony?
Yeah. I think we had a discussion the debate just now about government regulation, etc., on carbon trading. Now, I think this is one area whereby the government should actually come in with more sort of interference to try and get all directors to be more updated and upgrade their skills. Because until you actually are knowledgeable in this particular sort of a topic, you are not really able to provide the necessary oversight that Datin has just mentioned. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Could I also request to open up the Slido link, if we have the QR code? Just as we are discussing, we would also like to hear from the audience if they've got some questions that they would like to put forth. Okay, whilst we are waiting, Datin, when you were sort of coming in just now, I think during the debate also, there were some questions about some companies not having any net zero targets. Have you personally encountered that, and what would your advice be to those companies and the boards?
I think this is why so many businesses are stepping up to advocate to the government. You know, they want to make it easier to do good, and for that it's useful if government is supporting, and so there's a competitive advantage to being good, isn't it? So of course you want to price a negative externality, but at the same time you really need to dismantle subsidies. And it's not just Malaysia, almost every country in the world subsidizes fuel at the pump. So the companies that are forward-looking, that are anticipating this, are already measuring their baseline emissions. They're using shadow pricing. In the EU and UK, ETS is already at $100 carbon. There are not very many businesses that will be able to survive this, but there are many businesses that are getting ready for this. So not everybody is going to make the transition. Many businesses are going to go under, and that's just the way it is. We're looking at a reset of the entire industrial base. 150 years where we've overseen tremendous creation of wealth and inequality, and now in less than 3 decades, much less than that, we're going to have to find another way of powering our lives. Right? And the lifestyles that we want, and we need to start paying for it as well. So there are many businesses, business leaders that are looking at this already.
Yes, and a few days ago, we had the hottest Sunday that we've ever had as a record. Tony?
Yeah, I understand the agenda, but I think Malaysia, as was pointed out earlier, 90% of the companies are actually SMEs. And the SMEs are the largest employer of, in the country. Now, I think we need to actually face the implementation. I know there's an urgency, but we should find a way to face it so that the SMEs have got the time to accommodate the changes and the increase in their business costs. Because if they actually are unable to survive in this sort of increasing cost environment, then there will be repercussions in terms of social problems when people are out of jobs. So it's not an easy thing to do. Definitely a balanced approach is required. But we are running out of time, so that is another problem itself.
So looking at that, maybe Datin, you would like to share, some of the best practice or strategies, that you may on the boards that you serve on, or people you have advised, or companies you have advised on, strategies that has successfully navigated climate risk or challenges, or those that even have boosted the financial performance of these companies.
So I'm not authorized to speak on any of the boards that I sit on.
It's okay, we're operating on Chatham House.
I know, I can still talk about it. But when I am presenting, I give a few examples. So for example, a sportswear manufacturer that really wants to embed sustainability into the DNA of the business before it even designs a new product. It really interrogates within the team, does this product need to come into existence? What is the problem that it is solving? And after this product has been used, even for a few years, can it be returned to us? Is there a resale or a second-hand value? Or can we take it apart and recycle it? Another example is, we live in a country, a region that's going to be disproportionately affected by extreme heat, flash flooding, landslides, sinkholes. And so businesses are trying to be off-grid, not just electricity, but even water. And some companies are recycling their water up to 4 times. So they really are adopting rivers. So for every liter of water that they use, they're protecting almost 2 liters worth in rivers as well. There are many, many examples. And I think for individuals as well, we're also seeing that. So the call to action is to halve your tenaga bill, commit to zero organic waste to landfills, be much more mindful about where you're sourcing your food, try to source locally, because we are a country with no food security. So it's another objective also is increasing your resilience as well, at the same time as selling your products.
But do you feel that the companies are kind of acting if their competitors are doing so? Do you feel that this is really the mindset that's going through?
So absolutely. So we're a small, open trading economy. So there's already tremendous pressure from our trading partners and multinationals. And although we're tiny, but we punch above our weight in a global supply chain, number 9 or 10, especially in the semiconductor industry. And YB Nick was correct, actually, if you're already RSPO certified, then you're not really affected by the deforestation requirements of EUDR. We're not very good at communicating a narrative, and also we tend to adopt a narrative where we're more like a victim, like CBDR, for example. But we might have contributed only 0.4% of cumulative emissions, but as YB Minister said, we're one of 17 countries of mega biodiversity. We have a really important stewardship role, and this is why this nature positive strategy is going to be super important for us as well.
Correct, and possibly the act as well, from a regulatory push as well, maybe. Tony?
Yeah, I think all the things that Datin say, I agree. But I also would like to suggest, for example, that one of the keynote speaker talk about we must develop certain things for ourselves in the Asian region, because we are actually very different from the industrialized nations. And if we continue to just follow the rules and standards set by the Western countries, we get into a point of conflict. And sometimes we actually put ourselves in a worse position, as YB mentioned, in terms of being a trading nation in the world. So this is something which perhaps when Malaysia becomes the chair of the ASEAN, we can actually put forward something, develop something which actually more suitable to how we operate here, but at the same time dovetail into the global requirements.
Thank you, Tony. So there are some questions coming through. So if you don't mind, I'll start addressing that. I think one of the main questions that audiences wants to know is, how can we translate the ESG and net zero targets into a top priority in boardrooms? Is translating it to the triple bottom line an efficient way?
So I don't quite understand the question.
I think the question wants to know how do you place ESG and net zero targets as a top priority, as a top agenda in the boardroom?
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, many of your trading partners, especially if you're an export-driven company, are going to be insisting, and the Standard Chartered survey 2 years ago was very clear, almost 3/4 are going to cut you out of the supply chain if you don't align with their sustainability ambitions. But within the boardroom, I mean, the climate governance principles actually advocate this. 8 principles, including accepting accountability, ensuring alignment of compensation, short and long-term climate subject matter experts, and so on and so forth. So it's relatively straightforward, but we don't actually discuss it in that sense, because I think really good boards try to embed sustainability into every single discussion. Is this sustainable? Is this going to work? And of course, there's this fear of greenwashing as well. And it's not necessarily litigation, it's also NGOs pointing this out, and of course, the advertising watchdog as well.
Correct. And Tony?
Yeah, I know that ESG is very important. The climate change challenge is certainly very real. But if you are looking into how a company operates, etc., the top on the agenda is still profit. Okay, so like Datin said, ESG, with the question, the ESG will not make it to the top of the agenda. It will be that part of the ongoing discussions in all the agendas that we cover, as to whether we have actually whatever strategy that we come up with, are we doing the right thing? Are we doing good?
Datin, you want to respond to that?
So I think the extent of the climate crisis is such that even if we were to hit net zero tomorrow, there is more certainty about the change in climate, the tipping points of slow-moving ecological systems, that there's more certainty about that the overwhelming majority of scientists already agree on, that there is For example, with your assumptions for interest rates, foreign exchange rates, and even artificial intelligence, there's just so much more certainty about what we are going to be facing. The cost of inaction is increasing significantly. The cost of transition is going to be extremely expensive. Without a smooth and just transition, it is going to be extremely disruptive for business. When you assess your climate risks and you're saying that this substation is going to be safe from physical risks, we very often don't take into account indirect physical risks. The roads might be impassable, there might be landslides or sinkholes, your staff might not be able to get to work, we have no food security, there might be hyperinflation of medical costs, which we are already seeing right now. So the pandemic has given us a flavor of this. In the first month of the pandemic, Vietnam halted rice exports. We might think that we have 2 to 3 months of egg and poultry, but our feed is important. And if our neighboring countries are willing to pay more for our eggs, then we don't have eggs, right? So I think resilience and being nature positive is going to be a big priority for many, many businesses. You might have a fabulous net zero strategy and not be able to survive.
Yeah, and I think it's inevitable that the cost of doing nothing will cost a lot more to businesses. Perhaps we would like to ask if anybody would like to ask questions from the audience. Are there roving microphones that somebody can pass around? Anyone would like to please raise your hand and introduce yourself? Jessica, maybe you'd like to ask something.
Jessica just moderated me on Monday.
Yes.
A fabulous documentary, Wasted. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for putting me on the spot. I've been very engaged this whole day, and we've had really magnificent conversations here. I think my question really here, when it comes to governance, is that directors today face huge liabilities, right? I serve on 2 listed boards, and every day a new thing gets put under us, whether it's sustainability, cybersecurity, workplace safety and health, audit, risk. And so with all these competing priorities, and also similar question that I posed to YB, how do you keep this on the agenda? And how do you actually, ensure that the board has the requisite, skill sets to guide management and to have that informed conversation as to where to go? Because I've been in many board conversations where it's always the last agenda topic on the board meeting agenda. And of course, that's changed and improved dramatically in recent years. But I think would love to hear from your experience. What are the conversations you're seeing playing out in the boardroom?
I was speaking to a group of directors at a GLC, and they were saying, put in different ways, that we've got shareholders that want short-term profits, and yet ESG is a priority, or more recently, the dilution of ESG ambition. There seems to be many large companies that seem to be diluting their ambition. So how is this going to work? So I want us to remember 2 things. Number one, it's not going to be a straight line going to true north. It's going to be a zigzag. Right? And as long as we really understand the extent of the crisis and why we need to act, then you just need to put 1 foot ahead of that. Then don't get distracted. Just keep interrogating, is this the right thing to do? And number 2, which unfortunately the board has to understand, is you need to be able to walk on water. You need to be able to report profits and increase the resilience of the business and sustainability of the business. And if it's getting too hot in the kitchen, you've got to step out and someone else is going to fill your place. That is the lay of the land right now when it comes to the boardroom. The traditional role of the director, where even if you are very conscientious and you read the board pack and you understood, all of that's out of the window. Right now you're facing multiple tsunamis, macro poly crisis, and it's underpinned by the climate emergency.
Tony, to add on?
Yeah, I think the lack of knowledge, as mentioned earlier, is a critical factor. And therefore, the nominating committee, right, the board evaluation that is done annually, is to identify the skill set gaps at the board level. And therefore, once that is done properly, you go and seek out the relevant talent to join the board. And during the nomination interview process, you actually need to have good and robust conversation with any potential candidate, because many can talk about it but actually don't know much about it. So that is one way to make sure that the skill set in the board fits the requirement under the current challenging conditions.
So to both of you, if somebody was, deciding to pursue a career also as a board director, would you think sustainability upskilling is an absolute must?
Definitely, I think I speak for both of us.
Thank you, Tony.
Datin, I believe you concur. Okay, let me just move on. Anyone from the floor, please raise your hand. Gentleman from there, anyone? Oh, okay. So for Slido, I think maybe I pose a question to Tony. There's a question on, are directors seeing direct pressure from shareholders on paying attention to climate and biodiversity risk?
Yeah, see, I speak about the Malaysian investors. Now, the profile of investors in Malaysian public listed companies, few institutions like the EPF, Co-op, LTAT, and lots of private individuals, and then of course there is a group of foreign investors. But generally, the Malaysian institutions are not that active in terms of pushing particular agendas. But I think that is now changing. As far as the retail investors are concerned, well, they are quite a basket case. They actually only attend AGM to get their door gift. So unless they change and ask more deep questions and challenge the management and the board at the AGM, not much is going to change. Yeah.
I do see a lot of investors are being very active. That you may have a different experience with that.
So as YB Nick shared, even children, his son, understands about this. And so when I meet directors and they're talking about they're asking questions about the basics of climate science, I tell them, that's the realm of children and teenagers. Go back home, look for some child that lives in your house or lives in next door and ask them these questions, because they are on top of all of this. I think if you're going to be an adult in the room at the table, you really need to put on your critical thinking hat and be able to think of how we're going to be part of the solution to this transition and no longer perpetuating a problem. And if I can just stress nature, biodiversity, planetary boundaries even more, ultimately all legal tender is indexed to nature. We need to remember that, yeah? And all layers of the climate capital stack is also catalyzed by nature. So especially as we're sitting here in the Securities Commission, it was in this same room that we launched Climate Governance Malaysia, 19th of May 2019. And it's so ironic because whether it's capital markets or the central bank looking to protect the systemic risks that the financial system is facing, I think they understand that if we're not able to increase our resilience in the climate crisis, then your legal tender, your capital markets, all of this are going to fall away.
Yeah, thank you. I think one of the questions here, there must be a CSO in the room. The question is, several CSOs have indicated their need for board approval for budget to measure, report, and then begin a decarbonization strategy. What advice can you give them?
Yeah. Personally, it's a consultant's bonanza right now. That it's become so difficult, and the consultants come in with their suits and their decks, and everyone thinks, oh, I need this person to tell me what to do. And I feel the analogy is you coming up with a PowerPoint presentation or a spreadsheet. Would you hire a consultant? You wouldn't. This is an existential crisis. We need to be able to have access to data so that we can make informed decisions on our own. Right now, you pay a consultant so much money, they tell you as at 31st December, these are your direct physical risks. That means by February, March, etc., it's already out of date, right? So we need to have access, and this is why one of the things CGM is working on is greenhouse gas calculators, national climate risk dashboard, and thankfully we have a minister who is super supportive. So we want to democratize access to data sets and then scenarios so that everybody can make informed decisions about where they want to allocate their capital, their savings, how they want to live.
So your advice would be to use some of the tools to access data that can support their presentation.
Yeah.
Tony?
Yeah, I think the internal people within the organization would know the business better than a consultant, and therefore they should actually come up with their own strategy, right? Now, the board is there to support the business. So if when the CSO comes out with the budget paper, the board paper, it's a question of actually setting out what is the background, what are the challenges, what are the options, and what are the costs to implement each option, and what is their recommendation. Now, if they are able to articulate what they are doing and giving the board a spread of options to choose from, and plus their recommendation, it is very unlikely the board will turn it down. Right? The board might ask for revision. Okay, maybe we can do it on a phase basis to reduce the financial pressure on the company if the company doesn't have that much financial capability, etc. But the board will not turn it down. So you will get your budget. It's just a question of how much and over what period of time.
Okay, so I think there have been many questions. I think there's a lot of management here who's wanting advice. How do you get your boards to support your ESG initiatives? How do you get your board aligned to the ESG goals as management? Maybe just a one-liner advice for them. In that sense, Tony has mentioned Datin.
I think it's really understanding the extent of the emergency. I think if you do understand that, then everything else will flow from that.
Okay, Tony, anything else to add on?
No, I'm
Okay.
I don't have.
So now we talked a little bit about SME just now, Tony, you've mentioned. There's a question on how can we ensure that SME directors are as aware of their responsibilities and have capacity building as directors of big PLCs. So I guess it goes back to resources, right? So how do they train themselves? I mean, they're not from bigger PLCs where they have a budget allocation for upskilling. What can SME do? Because they're an important part of the ecosystem.
Well, SMEs, by their very nature, tend to be family-built companies, and therefore they would normally have a family board. And when they have a family board, they tend to mainly focus on making money. Now, if they are not, it is now important and necessary for them to upgrade themselves because, like we said before, and many other sort of panels this morning has said before, if they do not upgrade themselves, they may lose a customer because they are not able to meet all the customers' ESG requirements. Now, one of the ways these companies can help themselves is actually to bring in independent directors to their board, or sometimes with a private company, they tend not want to bring in an outsider, so they actually can bring in perhaps a board advisor or independent advisor that they can actually bounce ideas from, get input from, get themselves updated that way.
Thank you. Datin?
Yeah, there's so many consultants, NGOs, there's so many, ICDM, there's so many sources of information. We ran our first National Climate Governance Summit last year. Over 3 days, we featured 105 speakers, 18 workshops, and so almost 2,100 attendees. And this year, we've got another 16 workshops, 8 masterclasses, and all of this is free of charge. So, there's so much effort, there's so many toolkits, calculators that are being made available, and incentives.
Yes, and YBC, it took him some months to get used to the terms and abbreviations. Okay, so maybe one last question to close for both of you. So we talked a lot about Malaysia's ambitions and goals, upcoming transition goals. What is the one thing that you would like to see happen on Malaysian boards that will help accelerate our development ambitions? Like an immediate action to help accelerate the government's goals.
Yeah, I go back to my complaint that the board of directors don't meet often enough. I think they should meet more often and expand the agenda so that they actually do spend sufficient time on the ESG agenda, plus a myriad of other things that they should actually focus on. But because most of the boards are more compliant board rather than a strategic board. That would be my sort of one thing that I would like to see.
So more airtime in that sense. That's it?
I think from advocacy with the government, there are two things that I feel would really make a big difference right now. Number one, we need to mandate emissions reporting. So right now, we might think as a country the problem is Petronas or Tenaga, but what if it's landfills, POMI, large hydro, for example? We need to mandate emissions reporting. And number two, we really need to price this negative externality. We start with carbon, then we go on to other things like water, arable land or soil, especially with so much chemicals leaching into our soil and so on and so forth. And once you can start pricing it, even if it's just shadow pricing to start with, that's going to be the beginning of conversations on how we need to act and liability.
Yeah, so in some ways you're quantifying the impact and the risk to the extent. Okay, so I'd like to thank both of you. Maybe I'll do a closing. Just very quickly, I think we discussed quite a lot of items, but majority on boards. I think what the key message came up is boards need to upskill themselves, update their technical knowledge. We have to be able to take on what's happening today and tomorrow. Datin, you've mentioned board needs to be a partner to their organization and a guardian for their organization. And of course, the importance of embedding sustainability in all boardroom discussions and management to have the capability to substantiate with data and utilizing the right tools and resources available. You can always contact Datin for the tools that you require. She's always very willing to help everyone out. But anyway, thank you both for your time today, and thank you to all the audience for staying back with us until 5. Thank you very much.